Hey, I've got an appointment I have to go to today, so I will not be around, but I wanted to make sure and give you something to practice. Now, I've had a lot of requests for some more kind of beginnerish things. So what we're going to be doing is for the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about some things to try and help your basic fundamental guitar practice. So what we're going to be doing today is I want to tell you about strumming and chording and trying to do those two things at the same time. So if you are one of those people that tends to struggle with getting your chords and your strumming to sound authentic, there's a few things I want to work on over the course of the next couple of weeks to help you with that. So today what we're going to be doing is talking about how important it is to separate the practice of your chords and your strumming, okay? So again, first of all, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day to hang out with me. And hopefully this lesson will help you or somebody that you know, maybe you're a teacher or you've got a friend that's learning how to play or whatever the case may be. So what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you just a real quick story. When I was a kid, I don't remember if I was like 9 years old or something like that when I first tried to learn how to play the guitar. And I lived in a very small town at the time. I grew up in Fargo, but for whatever reason, my family moved out to this really little town. And I had this acoustic guitar where the strings were about that far away from the neck, and you could have probably used it as a bow and arrow better than you could a guitar. But I was trying to learn on this thing, and the only thing I had to learn from, because we're talking 1978, 79 at that time, was a Mel Bay book, if you remember the Mel Bay stuff. So in this Mel Bay book, it was teaching me how to play some chords, and it was trying to teach me some strumming patterns, and I failed miserably. And it just didn't make any sense to me because my eyes were locked into, Rush and Kansas and Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Page. Like I would see videos every once in a while on like a Friday night show or something like that of them playing. And I knew what the album sounded like. And when I was trying to play, it didn't sound like what they were doing. Now, again, I had no concept in my brain of what guitar playing was at that time, but it just made the whole thing more frustrating. So here's what I did wrong, and that's what I want to talk about today, is making sure that you don't do the same thing. So when I was learning how to play, you'd learn how to play, for instance, like a G chord, right? So I'd make the G, and then I'd have this strumming pattern that I was learning how to play. But of course, anytime I wanted to switch chords, I'd wind up doing this. Right? That's how I played. And to be honest with you, I think those first memories of playing guitar is why I wound up becoming a teacher, is because in learning how to play that way, it was going to be very, very difficult to succeed trying to practice that way. And so now when I teach people, what I always try and explain to them is that if you think about your chording hand and your strumming hand as not really being friends, right? They're not trying to work together. And it's like the two halves of your brain are almost at odds with each other, okay? Because if you think about it, and we're going to get more into this next week too, but if you think about it, your chording hand is doing something that's very, very black and white. You're making the G correctly or you're not, or you're making the D correctly or you're not. Now, we're not going to worry about that there's different ways to make a G and things like that. That's a whole nother conversation. But once you've learned how to play whatever chord it is you're trying to play, what you need to do is practice that chord. That's a pretty black and white concept. Now, the strumming thing, though, is a whole nother idea, which we're going to get into again in another video. But learning how to make your strum sound organic and real and authentic, so when people hear you play, it doesn't sound like you're practicing, it sounds like you're playing, okay? Without the strum, your chords sound like this, right? Nobody can hear them. Okay, so that's why the strum is so important. But in order to set up this authentic element that is strumming, we have to be able to make the chords correctly. So here's what I want you to understand from today's Monday Guitar Motivation is that when you first start trying to figure this out, or maybe you've been playing for a while and you're still struggling with this, you need to understand that both of these hands need to be worked on independently. Okay, so the first thing that I always teach students when they come in, like if I was having a guitar lesson and a beginning student, regardless of the age, comes in, the first thing that we always do is we talk about, well, what kind of music do you like? And, what did you grow up listening to? And do you play any other instruments? And what inspires you? And all those kinds of things. And once I get some information from them of music that they like, What I try and do is find something that fits the thing I'm going to explain to you right now. Now, if they walk in and they say, well, the only thing I like is, speed metal or something like that. Okay, that's fine, but we need to find something that's maybe slower or mid-tempo or something like that we can try and practice with. And the first thing I always teach people is a technique called scratching. And what scratching is when you just touch all the strings of the guitar. Okay? Now, I was just doing some recording, so if you wonder why this is on here, it's just keeping all the strings from making unwanted noise down here. Sometimes behind the nut, you'll get some extra, vibration and things like that. So don't worry about this, but that's what that is. I was doing some recording and just keeping it very, very quiet. So anyway, as I'm doing this scratching, what I'm doing is I'm going to touch all 6 strings with all 4 of my fingers like this. And it doesn't matter if I'm down here or right here or right here. It doesn't make any difference. I just touch the strings. Now, I'm not pushing on the strings. I'm lightly touching them. So when I strum, I'm getting this scratching sound. I'm not doing that. I'm not pressing down. I'm barely touching those strings and just kind of laying all my fingers on there. Now, you could do one, but then sometimes you're going to get sounds like that. You see, if you just lay all your fingers on there, you can get this nice, quiet scratching sound. So what I generally try and teach students is we'll pick some songs that they like, or at least they can tolerate, right? Again, depending on their interest in music and, how much the vast amount or minimal amounts of things that they actually listen to, trying to find something that works. And what I teach them to do is just start learning how to strum. And again, next time we'll talk a little bit more about this strumming thing, but the first thing we'll do is we'll just start moving to the beat of the music. So when we hear those drums and we hear that music start, we start trying to figure out where we would tap our foot or tap our leg or something like that. And wherever that is, that's where we start putting in this down strum. And the most important thing to teach is that the arm never really stops. In these early stages like this, we're not trying to learn to strum like that. We're learning how to strum in a nice, uniform, smooth way like this. Okay? Now, once we start learning how to do that, of course, we've got our up strums that exist in between those down strums. Now, again, as we talk next time about the strumming aspect of this, I'm gonna tell you another story about that. But the most important thing is as you get better at this, you'll listen to the music and you'll start trying to figure out whether or not what you're doing is matching rhythmically with the guitars or whether or not what you're doing is matching more with the overall sound of the song. And a great example of this is if you go and listen to like Old Time Rock and Roll by Bob Seger. I used to use this all the time for teaching. And the one thing that you'll notice about Old Time Rock and Roll is when you listen to it, you're not hearing a prominent guitar. You're hearing the music, which is very different, right? So sometimes a student might listen to that song and go, well, I don't really hear the guitar, so I'm not sure what pattern I would play. Well, the trick is being able to listen to the music and decide on something that fits rhythmically. Now, if you think, just take those old records, there's where your downs could be, and your ups would go in between there. And I know, again, that's easier said than done, but my point is the journey of learning how to strum and learning how to listen to music and then establish a strumming pattern that fits whatever it is you're doing is practice on its own. It doesn't require chords. As a matter of fact, trying to throw chords in there is going to make all of this even more difficult, which is the point of my conversation today. So as I'm listening to Old Time Rock and Roll, I'm not really hearing the guitar with a strumming pattern per se. I'm just hearing the song and deciding on a strumming pattern that I can scratch. Now, if I can't hear a strumming pattern or something that seems to fit, at the very least what I can do is simply try and put those downs in and then start adding some ups in whatever capacity makes sense to me, right? So I might just play a pattern. Down, 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 up, down. And maybe that's good, at least to start with, right? So as I'm listening to various songs, I'm trying to figure out how to put my downs in and then add some ups in between those downs. Now again, if this is kind of new to you or you're kind of where I'm talking about, don't worry about the perfection of finding the exact strum. It's not really that. That will come later. The most important thing is that you find the beat and you learn how to listen and play at the same time. So you have something coming in and something going out, right? So as you're listening to that music, you're just responding. It doesn't have to be the exact strum or anything like that. You're just trying to hear where's the beat, and then put your downs there and start scratching to it. And even just doing downs to begin with is perfectly fine. But if you want to, you can certainly start adding some ups in between, maybe making a pattern or whatever. And if that's too much for you, it's okay. If it's not, if this makes sense to you, the next step is trying to figure out how to, and again, we'll talk about this more next time, but how to make that strum sound a bit more organic by using some dynamics. Loud and soft and hitting different, beats and missing different ones and things like that. And again, that's what we'll talk about next time. So that's the first step, is just learning how to play along with something that isn't incredibly fast, something that we can hear, we can tap our foot, and we can start putting those downs in and then add some ups if possible. If not, that's okay. We might have to wait for that. And this becomes a daily practice routine on its own, is just listening to things. You might turn on the TV or just turn on the radio and try and just practice strumming along with things that you hear. You find the beat, you figure out where the down is, and you start trying to strum to it, okay? That's what you need, and this is what I was missing in the beginning when I was trying to strum and play at the same time, is strumming to me only meant making this strumming pattern. And then I couldn't think about, because it's multitasking, right? I couldn't think about strumming and chording at the same time because I wasn't ready. And so I'd have to stop because I wasn't able to do both at the same time. So developing that scratching to various songs is very, very important. And again, we'll get to another conversation about the strumming in another Monday Guitar Motivation very soon. So the second aspect of this is developing whatever the chord or the scale hand is doing, however you want to think about it, because you can do this for any of those things. So what you need to do is, when you want to learn how to play a G or a D or a C or all three of them, you need to develop them independently and develop strength and speed to be able to do what you want to do, and accuracy. So if you wanted to play a G chord, for instance, it's not just a matter of making the G chord, it's how quickly can you make the chord and how accurately can you make that chord. And so we practice doing it repetitively. And what I always teach people is a technique I always called bouncing. I've called that since I first started teaching, because that's what it looks like, is you're picking your fingers up and setting them down, so it looks like you're bouncing. So what I do here is I take, for instance, this G chord, and what I want to train myself to do is, while retaining this shape, I want to lift my fingers off the guitar, and then I want to set them back down. And I want to be able to lift it up and keep the shape while I'm in the air, which is really the most important part of this. I don't want to pick it up and do this. I want to pick it up, keep the shape, and then set it back down. And pick it up, and then set it back down. All the while that I'm doing this, what I'm doing is concentrating on how it looks and how it feels. Now, I'm not worried about how it sounds yet because I'm not strumming yet, right? I'm just picking it up and setting it down. But while you're doing this, and while you're really doing any kind of practice, always remember what I refer to as focus practicing, which is, don't have the TV on distracting you, or talking to somebody, or worried about that you're only going to practice for 1 minute, then you need to move on to, playing some video games or something. Take the time, even if it's only 10 minutes, take the time and focus on what you're doing. Give everything that you've got to that application of that technique or that idea. So you're really ingesting what it is that you're practicing. So I'm looking at the G, I'm thinking about the G, I'm watching what's happening, I'm thinking about how all of my fingers feel as I lift those fingers up and I set them back down. That's the best way of being able to retain this information, is be in the moment with whatever it is you're practicing. Again, regardless of whether it's 5 minutes or 35 minutes, right? Just whatever it is that you've got, you're trying to really practice and think about what you're doing. So the next time you come back to the guitar and you make that G, this is all repetitive, right? Like muscle memory, really. So what you're doing is you're thinking about, as I make this G, where's my elbow at, right? Where's my shoulder at? And I'm looking at this. I've always called this the rock star syndrome. For some reason, especially beginning guitar players, when they first start playing, I don't know if it's innate or if somebody told them, but nobody wants to look at their guitar. It's like driving and not looking at the road or closing your eyes or something. don't do that. Like, experience what's happening. Be in the moment what's happening. Look at what's happening. You don't need to look around the room while you're doing this, and then you look down and go, hey, my hand's in the wrong place, or I'm pressing on the wrong strings. How did that happen, right? Well, it happened because you took your eyes off the prize. You stopped looking at what it is you were trying to do, and so you really need to focus on that. Someday, that's fine if you stop looking at your guitar, but right now, it's what you should be looking at. Be in the moment, okay? So you practice picking your fingers up, you practice setting them down over and over and over. And don't worry about how fast it is. Like, that's the first thing, again, that people go to is, well, I better do this as fast as humanly possible, even though I'm doing a terrible job. It doesn't matter how fast you do it. Again, if you're in the moment, what you're thinking about is the fact that when the fingers are in the air, it's just as important, if not more important, than it is when they're on the guitar. Because you're training your hand, if I set my hand on my lap, you're training your hand to come up, and I've already made the G chord before I ever get to the guitar. And then it just sets down. That's what I'm looking for. It's not getting to the guitar and then building it, because if I do that, I'm going to be late every time. That's what I was doing in the beginning. If I go and I have to build it, I'm going to be late. So, which theoretically means I'm not really going to be able to play along with anything because I'm always going to be late. But if I can train my fingers to make that G chord, so when I want a G, again, if my hand's on my lap, if I want a G, there it is. Or if I want a D, there it is. You see, you bounce it back and forth, you lift it up, you set it down over and over and over to train yourself to understand what it is that you're trying to do, so these chords move into the automation part of your brain, like walking and talking at the same time. There was a time when you were little, that was really difficult to do. When you got older, you don't even think about it anymore, even though, once in a while we stumble here and there. But for the most part, we can do it without even worrying about anything, right? Because that's how it works. Well, this and this have to work the same way. I have to develop this to automation. And what I always do with students when I used to teach lessons, private lessons, is I'd have them practice their strumming, and then I would ask them questions while you're strumming. Like, they'd be playing whatever, right? And I'd say, okay, what's your phone number? And then they have to say it out loud, but they can't say it in time. They can't go 5, 5, 5, 4, 9, 8, 7. They have to talk to me like a human, not a robot. So they have to go 5, 5, 5, 4, 9, 3, 2, right? And I'd say, okay, count backwards from 10. Okay, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, whatever, right? So what I was trying to do is get their brain disengaged with what was happening here, so this would become automatic, right? And so they'd be able to disengage their brain so they could talk to me while they're strumming. You see, little tactics like that do really well if you're a teacher, or if you're learning how to do this. Those are just little things that you can do. So when you're making these chords, again, you're thinking about it, you're practicing it over and over and over, developing that automation, right? We can call it muscle memory, but really what you're doing is developing the automation through the repetition of that, okay? And once you've developed that, then what you can do is you can start trying to practice, which is the most important part, because once we've developed the G, we can strum it, and that's great, and we should do that. Make sure all the notes are working, everything sounds clean, all that kind of stuff. Get used to strumming the proper strings. Again, that's all part of it. And just so you know, I've got all kinds of information like this. If you head over to guitarzoom.com, there's a membership that you can join that has all kinds of different videos and guitar courses on all of this stuff. So anyway, I can develop all of that, and I want to, right? I want to hit the right strings and work on all these different things. But the big trick is once I've got G and I want D, I want to be able to move to D without stopping my strum. Okay? Now again, right now in this lesson, we're learning how to scratch independently and how to chord independently. We're not putting the two together right now. We're just practicing how to scratch, listen to the song, sing along with the song, keep the scratch going, whatever. Again, disconnecting so the strum becomes automated and we're able to talk or think or whatever, sing, whatever it might be, while the strum is engaged. Over here, we're practicing bouncing a particular chord, D or A or G or whatever, or all of those. But the last step, and then I'll let you go here, the last step is if you're trying to get from G to D, is you have to develop that G and you have to develop that D. But at some point, you've got to practice moving from G to D, which is what I've always called lift and shift, because you're lifting the chord up, you're shifting to the next chord in the air, and then setting it down. You're not waiting till you get to the chord or the fretboard and then trying to build it, because again, you're going to be late. The goal is lift it, shift it, and then set it down. Now, if you try and do that and it's unsuccessful, you don't have to go, I suck, I can't do this, because none of that's true. What you have to do is go, why? Why is it not working? Did I not practice my D chord enough? Did I not practice my G chord enough? I have to practice those things to the point that they become automated. And it might take a week or 2 weeks or 6 weeks or 6 months. You know, I had a rough time learning how to do some of these things when I first started learning how to play. It's not like I grabbed the guitar and everything was easy for me. It was not that way at all. But it's just through trial and error and, again, being aware, being in the moment, going, this isn't working, why? Not, this isn't working, I can't do this. But why isn't working? What do I need to work on? Well, you can understand then when you try and put together these two hands where the failure can occur. Because if they're not ready, they're not going to work together. Because your brain is going, I don't understand, and I can't think about both these things at the same time. This is confusing me. And what does your brain do? It shuts it down, shuts everything down and goes, you got to hold on. Right? And that's when you stop. So if you practice your scratching, which is your strumming, independently, and again, we'll talk more about that in the future, and then you practice your chord changes independently and develop those. Now, I'm not saying you got to sit and practice 30 chords every day. Whatever, wherever it is, if you're learning how to play A, D, and E, those are the ones you should focus on. I'd rather have you play 2 or 3 or 4 chords great than 33 chords terrible. Because you can't utilize terrible just because you know them. Again, maybe a pat on the back. Guess what I learned? But the most important thing is, can you use them? Can you make music with them? That's what we're looking how to do. So the less information, that's okay. You've got the rest of your life to figure out how to do whatever those other things are. But let's start learning how to make these things work together. Okay? And I had mentioned earlier about scales, because you can do the same thing with scales. You can practice them essentially by bouncing, which is picking them up, setting them down over and over and over to develop that muscle memory so your fingers know where it is that they're going to be going when you play whatever it is you're doing. You see? So if that makes sense, that's what we're going to work on for this week, is trying to develop this. Now, it might not be perfect by the next time we talk, but at least it gives you an idea of how to start breaking this down fundamentally for your practice. And then over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about strumming and putting these together and all kinds of different things like that. Again, I've had just a ton of people asking about this, and I get it. Because the truth is this is the most important part of your guitar journey. Once you can learn how to do these things, you can actually start playing music. You can actually start playing songs. You can actually start playing with other people. Now, you might want more and more and more and more, and that's wonderful. But it has to start here, you know? So anyway, hopefully that helps you. Again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful week. And again, make sure you head over to guitarzoom.com, check out our membership. If you're looking at learning more of these kinds of things, or you just, you know, because obviously we've got tons of videos and notation for everything that I talk about, all that sort of thing, different backing tracks that you can use for different stuff. So there's just all kinds of information. So take care, stay positive.